Introduction. It has long been my belief that self-defense should be a prerequisite at some point in every person's life, preferably in their early years. It should be as normal as going to math class or learning to use a cell phone. Do you remember back when cell phones were as big as a lunchbox and only a few people had them? Now it's hard to imagine life without them. That's where we need to be as a society in regards to self-defense. Throughout this book, we'll discuss topics that most people ignore, forget, or overcomplicate. The object is not to put you in fear or stir up paranoia, but to educate you and create much-needed awareness and understanding. I start with the basics for beginners and intermediate students of self-defense. Later, I also devote several chapters to experienced martial artists and others interested in martial philosophy. This isn't a picture book about how to kick and punch. It's more a manual that seeks to sharpen the mind. This information can be applied by people of all ages, from all walks of life, and all fitness levels. You may read something here that shakes you up, frightens you, or even offends you. If that happens, please remember the goal: a no-ego, highly informative approach to give you, the reader, a look deep inside the psychology of self-defense and the creation of personal safety awareness and understanding. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Chris Sutton, and I'm a professional in the self-defense and martial arts industry. I've also worked extensively as a corrections officer, a law enforcement officer, and a sheriff's deputy for city and county agencies. During my law enforcement years, I also served as a boot camp drill instructor for high-priority juvenile offenders. From an early age, I've devoted a lot of time and effort to training in and instructing a wide variety of martial arts and combative self-defense programs, earning numerous black belts. I've dedicated my life to creating a greater awareness of self-defense training for everyone. Drawing on both my diverse martial arts background and my practical experience in related fields, I developed the COBRA self-defense system, upon which this book is based. This nationally licensed self-defense program was designed to be highly effective, easy to learn, and very realistic. Think of it this way: when you're hungry, you want food. Nothing else will satisfy you. Likewise, when you're in a serious situation, you need life-saving self-defense and awareness skills. Humor, a college degree, good looks, those won't cut it. When self-defense is a must, nothing else will do. Think about this. Ready? Let's get started. Book 1. Real-Life Self-Defense. Training your body will cultivate your mind, exposing qualities and advantages no one can just get. This will bring an understanding that what is gained carries more value and use than just for physical combat. Chapter 1. This is reality. When confronted by the unknown, a person who is not physically and mentally prepared can suffer from and be paralyzed by fear, primal fear. Fear can be the last thing you feel before a tragedy or death. Denial, panic, and fear can stop you in your tracks. Being prepared by learning realistic self-defense and knowing how to react in a stressful situation can be a priceless asset. Ask yourself this question: who will be there for you in a crisis situation? The answer is you. When reality hits, it's unexpected, and you're usually alone. This can be a dreadful feeling, especially if you don't know what to do. Let's be perfectly clear about one thing. You don't have to live in a heightened state of paranoia to achieve security in your life. You don't need an electric fence, armed guards, and attack pit bulls to get a good night's rest. You do need to be prepared. We live in a great country with many laws in place to protect us. But a bad guy doesn't care about that, or about you. Read the following paragraph very carefully. The worst thing that could possibly happen to you probably won't happen. We live in a relatively safe society. You probably won't get sick from pesticides on unwashed fruit or salmonella in undercooked poultry, based on proven statistics. Are you okay with the words probably, possibly, could, and relatively in this example? Most individuals would never eat unwashed fruit or raw chicken because of the possibility that they could get sick. On the other hand, most of those same people have never even thought about seeking an education on personal safety or anything related to it. This doesn't make them wrong or a bad person in any way. It's just never been a priority for them. You cannot rely on wishful thinking, religion, good luck, or hearsay. You must be proactive in obtaining security in life. Do it for yourself, your family, and your future. A realistic conflict has its own feel, energy, fear, apprehension, and lasting mark on your mind. Trying to grasp something this intense when you have never experienced or trained for it is like trying to explain the color red to a person who has been blind their entire life. So I'll illustrate with a story. I won't divulge whether or not this particular incident really happened or who it happened to. That isn't relevant. But I would like you as the reader to try to experience and live this story. The fight. A knowledgeable and competent man, we'll call him Scott, is speaking with a less than honorable and very malicious man, we'll call him John. Scott feels a surge of heat as blood rushes to his head. He looks up and realizes that John is slowly closing the 4-foot gap between them. Scott gives a loud and commanding shout to John to not get any closer. But there is zero concern in John's face. After an intense verbal altercation, Scott moves to physically gain control over John. Scott observes a passiveness about John that appears to be false. The two men are an inch apart, and as Scott is attempting to gain quick tactical control over John, his instincts set off every panic alarm in his body, even though John is being very passive. Scott realizes that even though John is facing away and very calm, something is not right. John's knees are bent ever so slightly, and his chin is tilted to the side, so his right eye is fixed on Scott. Scott tastes enamel in his mouth from clenching his jaw so tightly. His hearing is dull, but his eyesight is sharpened, and he notices a strong smell of car fumes, leather, and sweat. Scott has been here before, and he realizes he needs to breathe and focus, because he is now inside the energy of John, and they both understand what is about to take place. Scott focuses past the darkness and the lights to see one bead of sweat on the right side of John's face. Scott and John lock eyes as John takes a deep breath. As Scott controls John's right wrist, John spins around fast, swinging the back of his right arm at Scott. Scott felt this coming right before it happened, and is prepared with his hands up next to his head. Scott is struck on the side of his head, but shielded by his own arm. John begins to shout and curse, and attempts another strike. Scott realizes he won't have any help anytime soon, and remembers a truck honking as it drove by. Scott strikes John, and as John falls, Scott vividly remembers seeing a car entering a drive-thru at a restaurant across the street. John falls flat on his back, like in a movie, but he's getting up quick. Scott feels exceptionally calm and clear-headed because he has felt like this before. John is fighting like a wild animal. Scott strikes John 8 times, twice while he's against a car and 6 more times as they are on the ground. Scott is on top and continues to strike John with a closed fist, elbows, and an open hand. John, in a fetal position, pulls his legs in and begins to roll over to attempt to stand up. Scott continues with knee strikes, so many he can't keep count. The two men pause, tangled against a car. There's blood all over John's shirt and Scott's hands, and there is a distinct bloody drag mark on the car. Scott feels like he's stepped in water because his feet are soaked with sweat. Scott's clothes are in disarray, and both men are breathing hard and sweating profusely. John stands up and strikes Scott, hitting the side of his neck, then attempts to tackle him to the ground. Scott goes to the ground and is on top again. The fight continues, with Scott punching the ground while attempting to hit John. Scott can now taste and feel a rush of endorphins in his body. This is the third such shot he's felt since the outset of this conflict. Scott begins to strike so fast he feels sick, but still he keeps going. John grabs the weapon Scott is carrying and tries with all his might to get it from him. Scott reaches for John's eyes, clipping his right eye with his right index finger. John's eyes shut, but he's still fighting. Scott stands up. He can't feel his legs very well. His throat is bone dry. John can't keep his grip due to the sweat and blood and remains on the ground. Scott has never been where he is right now. Everything has changed. It's like a very bad dream, the kind of dream where you can't get out of the middle of a busy road. Scott is using all he's learned and everything he has. He hasn't sustained any real damage. However, the feeling he's experiencing is uncharted territory. Scott can feel the damage he's inflicting on John, yet John keeps fighting. John stands up and runs at Scott, and the two men lock up again. Scott picks up John and slams him to the ground as hard as he can. Scott begins to ask himself, how much longer? Why is he not stopping after everything I've done to him? John attempts to choke Scott, but ends up just holding onto his shirt. Scott postures up, holds John by his throat, and begins to strike him repeatedly. Scott's arms are numb. As both men again mutually pause in the heat of combat, Scott vividly sees his watch, which is approximately 10 inches away as he's gripping John's neck. Scott knows what time the incident was initiated because his cell phone screen displayed the exact time as he got off his phone. It has only been 57 seconds since all this began. It feels like 30 minutes to Scott. It's unreal. To shorten the story, let's jump ahead. Scott and John continue fighting for another 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Although Scott didn't suffer any major physical damage, after it was over, his body felt wrecked and his mind was on fire. John was physically much worse off, but it didn't really matter to him. Scott learned many empowering and priceless things on that day. Now let's get back to you, the reader. Would you like to experience 10, 20, or 30 seconds of that story? Probably not. But it's not up to you. The bad guy picks the day, not you. What would you do if it happened today? How would you fare? This book was written to give you a basic understanding of mental and physical self-defense martial arts tactics. Read, reread, and completely understand this material. I cannot overstate this enough. Welcome to the world of reality self-defense and its fundamental principles.